Spiritual Director here at our Center for Spiritual Living here in Granada Hills, where we welcome all who practice their beliefs and faith and love. And it's lovely to have you here. And are you Mark by any chance? Welcome, Mark. And with your friends who look like they might be related to you. Yes, good. Well, you're most welcome. Yeah, exactly. So, and please help me welcome our presider this evening, Suzanne Jensen. And so we're going to start off as we always do here. We're going to bring down the lights just a wee bit, and we're going to take a deep, conscious breath and release. And in that release, we're just surrendering to this eternal now moment as we come together for our call to service, which we call lighting the flames of faith. And we perform this ceremony to promote the universal consciousness of life, which acknowledges that all peoples, all faiths, all sentient beings come from the one great universal presence, which we call spirit. Now, fundamental to this truth is the unifying nature of all religious thought and experience, which we honor here this evening. So as Suzanne lights the first candle, it's for the Tao, honoring the universal path of harmony and equilibrium, the natural way. We light the second candle for shamanic traditions, honoring the beliefs and practices of all indigenous peoples, the way of primal spirituality. The third candle we light for Hinduism, honoring the path of knowledge, action, and devotion. We light the fourth candle for Judaism, honoring the ethical path of living by sacred law. The fifth candle we light for all forms of Buddhism, honoring the Four Noble Truths and the path of compassion. The sixth candle we light for all forms of Christianity, honoring the Christ consciousness as the path of love. The seventh candle we light for all forms of Islam, honoring the path of submission to the will of God as the highest calling. The eighth candle we light for the universalistic religion of Baha'i, honoring the path of unity and peace. The ninth candle we light for all forms of new thought, honoring the metaphysical path of mental healing through the practice of universal spiritual principles. And the 10th candle we light for all those who are as yet unaware of the power and presence of spirit in their lives, and for the space we hold for them here at our center. And as Suzanne lights the healing candle, please put silently into the light the names of anyone you wish to have experience the healing flame of God's eternal love.
I'm thankful, so grateful. I'm one with the Spirit all around me. I'm thankful, so grateful. I trust in God. I surrender. I'm one with the Spirit all around me. I surrender. I trust in God.
I know tonight that the Spirit of all life is right here in this place, within and without. And I know that we are all living this life of oneness. This is a day the Divine Spirit has made, and we rejoice in it. We give thanks for this lovely opportunity to experience an individualized, creative expression of wisdom and truth as our guest, Dr. Mary Hensley. We joyously accept the gift of this wonderful evening of discovery and communing together. all in the energy and atmosphere of God, which permeates this sacred place. I now release my word to the law in thankfulness for knowing that the universe always says yes. And together we acknowledge this by saying, and so it is. Good evening. Opening to the presence. I read something recently on experiencing the presence of God within from the Daily Guides and Science of Mind magazine. It inspired me to share on the subject of opening to presence. Here's a quote from the Daily Guide. God is always present in our lives. To experience Spirit, we must be willing to deepen our consciousness. We must be receptive to the truth that is within. We can talk about God, read about God, and hear about God, and we still will not feel God until we open our consciousness to the presence of God. So for myself, the experience of the presence of God is made known to me when I consciously choose to enter into the space of inner stillness deep in the center of my being. And I enter this space in a state of open receptivity. I invite presence in by making myself available to hear the still small voice, the voice of divine intuition and guidance. And I know we are all acquainted with this place of peace and serenity. We know firsthand the space of divine presence. There's nothing like it. And this is where we know creative power and inspiration, the fullness of being. And it seems to me that when we feel limited, that is our clue that we're living on the outer plane and not in touch with the inner flow of abundant life and being. And when we notice this feeling of unwholeness, in that moment, we can make a choice. It is my idea that as humans, we can decide to live in the expanded awareness of both the inner and the outer dimensions simultaneously. We can utilize our power of decision to invite presence in wherever we are in life. And if we reach a crossroads in life, a circumstance or a situation, we can choose right then to invite Spirit in, to enter into silence, to be still and know, in faith and in complete trust. And to me, that is the transcendent living in expanded reality, thinking and acting from spiritual consciousness. Here's a quote from the Science of Mind text. The teaching of the mystics has been that there should be a conscious courting of the divine presence. And here's another one from This Thing Called You, in Ernest Holmes' book. Divine guidance is yours for the asking. The answer to any problem that you can ever be confronted by, that can ever confront you, already exists at the center of your being. We are so blessed in our awareness of the presence of God. Namaste.
So thank you, Suzanne. And it's so I first met Mary Helen a few years back now, stringing Christmas lights. So we keep running into each other around this time of year, I guess. And as you shall see, she's quite charming and easy to get to know, and we've kept in touch. And of course, she lives in Athlone, Ireland. So over here, she's known as a lady from Ireland, but in her neighborhood, she's known as the American. So, but it's always delightful to see her. And I was also sitting there thinking about how appropriate this subject is, and particularly given where you're living, where people have lived, thousands of years before Europeans made it to the New World in Athlone there. So she took me around to to one of her favorite ancient sites, and so I just love that whole connection that you have to not only the subject matter from which she has written extensively, and which we will all benefit from, but also from this this little slice of heaven in that little part of the world. So please help me welcome Dr. Mary Helen Hensley.
Thank you. I love that I'm more Irish than the Irish guy. And greetings to everybody. We're live streaming on Facebook, and it's middle of the night in Ireland, but you'll catch us in the morning with a cup of tea. I am so excited to be here, and thank you as always. I love the space that you all have created here. Church, as we all know, a spiritual center, wherever you choose to practice your faith, is all about the people. And, it's all about the vibration that you create when you come together here. And you've made a lovely space here, and I love coming here. Most every time I come to Los Angeles, I get out here. So it's wonderful to be back, and I thank you all for being here and sharing this time with us. I have to laugh because I still sit, whatever ism or itis I have going on, the world has yet to discover or put a title on. And I sit over there kind of in the corner like a kid on Christmas Eve. And whenever I get into a space like this, and I have to just laugh when I get up into a pulpit, especially because my father was a minister in the Deep South. And so I grew up in that environment. I went to church on Sunday morning, Sunday evening. We went to Wednesday night church supper. I went choir, handbells, and puppet ministry, you name it. I did it. And I spent most of my childhood in church, but I was always the one in the back going, hang on a second, that doesn't make sense. And so I get so tickled when I'm in here, and my father would just be rolling over right now laughing, because whenever I see this kind of setup, my father was a huge man, and he was, 6'2", 6'3", big, American football player. And he had this deep, booming Southern voice, and people just loved to listen. Not so much because of what he was delivering about spirituality and our path to heaven and the resistance of moving into a space that we really didn't talk about. It was more about where we were going, not where we didn't want to be. But people loved his sermons because it always had something to do with Friday night football. Because he was also a football coach. And so he even had a radio show on Sunday mornings that people listened to before they went to church called Football, Before and After. And so he had really entertaining sermons, and he had great congregations because of the fact he knew how to hit that vibration with his audiences, where it wasn't just reading the text and over and over. He could engage. And I grew up watching that, and I watched how wonderful it made people feel. But also, being the little nut job that I am, I would sit in the back because my mother, the preacher's wife, never let us sit. I never, ever have sat on a front row in a church in my life. I don't know if I was bad, if I was the naughty child, if I was noisy. She always said it was in case she had to take us out. So I just was sitting there. I got so tickled, and you were reading such a lovely thing, and it was so reverent, and I was just rolling because I suddenly got this vision of this time when my father had a lipoma. Everybody know what a lipoma is? Fatty tumor, right? But his unfortunately happened right in the middle of his giant back. So he looked like the hunchback of Notre Dame until that thing got taken off. And so as a child, I was sitting on the back pew, and I thought it would be really funny mid-sermon to take all the tissues that were in my mother's handbag and stuff them down my shirt. And as my father is talking about, let my children go, and I turned like this, and I was back there, and I saw him see me, and boy, did I get it after that. And I just remember, let your children go. So this kind of environment has always been such a great thing for me, because growing up in that world, it was the South. We were Southern Baptist. My church was full of white people, and everybody was quiet. And one of my favorite things to do when I go home now is I go to church in different locations around my town, because I'm all about spreading it around and sharing. And I think the gospel music and the the community by sharing experiences through the different churches is such a huge part of it for me, and I absolutely love that. So, we were supposed to be really quiet, and, we didn't move or make a peep. And, like this past Sunday morning, I was doing a book signing at Agape, and, there's Michael Beckwith, and we're doing jamming, and everybody's dancing. It was great, and it was the best feeling in the world because it's all about movement, rhythm, vibration, and you all create that atmosphere here. But having the live music, it's such a big deal, And so spirituality, no differently than life and death, isn't supposed to be this very quiet. It can be at times. And when we're speaking about death, we can honor where somebody is, and we can be respectful, and we can be quiet and reverent at times. And then there's other times when death is just downright funny, And I don't know who in here has been with it. I have had, by nature of what I do as a metaphysical healer, I have sat through many, many a death. And it is probably one of my most favorite things to do. You would be surprised because you think as a healer, don't you love seeing people shift through these ailments and move through and rediscovering their own power, and they get up and they walk away from something that no longer serves them and they're healed, right? Love that part too, but I really, really enjoy the end of life process. I really, I just find it such an honor to be present when somebody is leaving. And, my personal life experience around death, interestingly enough, began at a very, very early age. And because of the gifts that I came in with that expanded following a near-death experience in a car accident in 1991 where I died, as a child, I was always able to tell when somebody was getting ready to die. It was just something I did. I would dream it. I'd have a little vision, whatever, which as the preacher's daughter was actually quite handy. Dad, get the yellow pad out, because he wrote everything on a yellow pad. I said, Mrs. Jones is going to be going on Tuesday, and it was kind of strange. And he had a really hard time trying to fit that into his little box there. And but he had to, because it was what was happening in my life. And so death was always a really interesting thing for me. It wasn't something that I was afraid of, because I seemed to traverse between worlds so easily, and so it wasn't something that was scary. And so this was something that was happening all my life. In fact, 2 nights ago, I went to bed and I had an experience where I was having what felt like heart palpitations. I'm 50, going through menopause. That's part of the symptoms of that. And I'm like, all right, you're either having a little menopause thing or a little heart attack. That's okay. Or this is about something else. And then I suddenly knew this was about something else. And so I just breathed through it. I went to sleep, and about 2 hours later, I wake up and a close relative of mine is standing at the foot of the bed. And he smiles and he waves. And I went, oh, okay. And I'll let everybody know. And so it was a relative, very close relative, who had just passed. And when I got up, I'm staying with my friend Angelica there, and I said, Angelica, this person has gone. She's like, really? And I said, yeah. And so then the phone call with my mother, and my entire life it's been. She's like, I've got some news, but I suppose you probably already know. I do. Yep, I've been in touch with everybody. He's fine. Everything's good. And she's like, well, good. And what was so interesting about that is that's so normal to me. And in speaking with the daughter of this relative, it was interesting because they were super close. And it was very difficult for her that she wasn't able to be there at the time. And what I explained to her, because this happens to a lot of people, everybody's got a story in their lives where they were sitting around the bed, holding vigil, being there with somebody who was ready to pass, and then they got up and went and got a cup of coffee and they died then. Or they just ran home for a quick shower and they've been sitting there for 6 weeks nonstop. And oftentimes what will happen in this case, the person who wasn't there, it might have been a little more difficult for the person to release and let go with them present. And for the person who was present, they're exactly the right individual who needed to be there at that time. And in my family, what was so interesting, when my father passed in 2012, I had been there for 6 weeks solid. And now I'd stand up here and I'd preach it all to you all. Let them, but don't hijack somebody's death. This is their time. But that was my daddy, right? So it's good for you, but I'm going to try and bypass it this time. And I sat and I was there with him. And I went home one night after 6 solid weeks. And I went to bed. It was about 2 a.m. And I awakened about an hour later, and I was shrieking. And my mother comes flying in, and she says, what? And I just went, I can't even talk about it. It was just so powerful. So went back to bed and got up the next morning, and I said, Mom, I had the most incredible vision of a man, and this was many thousands of years ago. And he happened to be a Scottish warrior, not Irish. He was on the ground, and he was obviously dying. He had been wounded below the knee. He was bleeding to death. He was manky and straw in the hair, muck on the face, and there was a woman standing there. And I was looking at him through her eyes and suddenly realized it was me. And the man on the ground, he rolls over and looks, and he says in Gaelic, which in the vision I could completely understand, "Leave me, woman, this is my death alone." And I went, and I realized that in that vision it was me, and I was watching that man who was my father. And I woke up, and my heart's pounding, and I'm sweating, and my mom's like, it's okay. Listen, I've got some things to do. You go on and do what you need to do today, and I'll meet you at the nursing home. And so my father was very, very proud of his Scottish roots, and my mother's side are my Irish people. And he was a descendant of Rob Roy McGregor, if you ever heard of the old Rob Roy. And Rob Roy had something called the black knee, and it was a birthmark below the knee. And my father, as a direct descendant, the males carried this birthmark, and he was so proud of it. And I'd gone and done my bits that day, and I arrive at the nursing home. This is just after having had that vision during the night. And my mom meets me at the door, and she goes, "You're not going to believe it," which is what I usually say to her. Mm-hmm. And I went, "Wow, what?" And she goes, "Go in and pull the blanket from your father's legs." I'm like, okay. So I go in and I pull the blanket back, and I looked, and my father's birthmark was gone. Gone. Absolutely gone. And she's like, "I know." And I'm like, "Come here." And she goes, "You got to leave." And I'm like, "What? I've been there all summer, you know." And Dad's obviously in the end days, whenever those end days are, because they can go on and on, can't they? And I was in for the long haul, and she's like, "You've got to go. It was you. That was what this was about." And I went, "You're right." So I went home. I booked my flight back to Ireland, packed up my things, got on an airplane, flew home, went and put all my clothes in the washing machine, and I waited. And so within 12 hours, I got the phone call that my father died. And it was me. I was the one sitting there talking to him and being all spiritual and, telling him it was okay to go. It's okay to go. Well, I mean, you don't need to say that but once, And so I was holding that back. So it was interesting with this relation of mine who had gone through this, and I was trying to explain, that's why you weren't there, because it was necessary for who was there to be there at that time. And what was interesting is, with my family, and we were quite close, and we had a sitter. And the sitter who was in with my father at the time of his passing calls my mother very early when it was suitable to let her know. And he said, "Mrs. Hensley, I will never be the same." And she said, "Why?" And this guy had quite a history. He'd had a tough time. He had, a questionable record in the past, and my mom wanted to give him a chance. She just liked him, And he said, "Coach Hensley turned into a young man right in front of my eyes." And she said, "Wonderful." And he said, and then the room filled with light. And then all of a sudden, up he came. And he said, no, I saw it. And she goes, "You don't have to convince me. My mom already knew this. I already know how this operates." He needed to be there. But he wasn't a close family member. He was an employee. He was someone who was a sitter. He needed to be there. It's not about what our plans are. It's what the divine's plans are, how we can be used in mighty ways. And I just thought it was such a neat thing, so when this happened just yesterday, And I was so grateful, and some people might think that's really creepy and spooky, but it's been happening my entire life, and it always gives to me great comfort because they'll always just pass through knowing, because it's like having, my channels are wide open all the time because I do this for a living. I practice this every single day of my life, because some people go, well, I never get that. How come I don't do that? And I'm like, well, are you in that direct connection all the time? I work on this every single day of my life. It's the one area that I'm disciplined, because you aren't going to see me in the gym every day. You know, it's the one area where I can say I am really disciplined there. And so what happens, why do they come to me? Because my door is open all the time, unconditionally. And they also know that I'm the type of person who's going to get the message across to whoever needs to get it. And so that was just, for me, a great little example of what life is like about living and dying. And so we've got this book that's called Bringing Death to Life. And there's a really interesting story around the title of this. This book is written by an author in Ireland called Patricia Scanlan, myself, an angel healer called Aidan Storey, and a spiritualist called Pamela Young. And after Patricia Scanlan's father died, she thought it would be a really good idea, because there were so many things that came up. If we navigated through some of the tough questions about death, and she kind of narrated that, and then we gave different perspectives about how we would answer those questions or personal experiences. And so thus became Bringing Death to Life. And it was really interesting because they were kind of like, the publishers, will a book about death sell? It went straight to number one. And, it was, people were ready to talk about it. And I was really delighted. But what was fascinating is when we went in for our first meeting, we were sitting around the table in the publishing house in Dublin, and this is Ireland now, mind you, so the cups of tea start coming in the door, and in comes one mug, next mug, and we're kind of at this round table, and this mug lands in front of me, and I went, "Oh, hi, Dad," because it had a big black bear on it. My father loved a bear, and he loved a bear because ever since he and my mother had gotten married, and they were on their honeymoon in Fontana Village, in North Carolina, Tennessee, I think. I don't remember where it is. Somewhere in the South, guys. They had been out, and there was a bear walking around, like just a tame bear that was part of the attraction. And my father was drinking a Coca-Cola out of a bottle. And so next thing, the bear walks up and reaches out and wants my father's Coca-Cola. And so there's this wonderful snapshot, black and white, of my dad standing there like this, and the bear is drinking his Coca-Cola. There'd be all sorts of animal cruelty stamps on that today, but back in the day, that's what happened. And so there were always little bear trinkets around our house. My mom would give Dad little bears, and there'd be little curios and little things of bears. And so, boom, plunk down, there's the bear mug, and I'm like, all right, that's a good sign. That's nice. And so in walks the CEO of the publishing house, and we have a title that we think is fantastic for this book. And they're like, nah, don't like it. Yeah, we just don't like it. It was something like, it sounded like something out of Harry Potter. I think it was Death, the Next Great Adventure or something like that. And they're like, it's a little flipped, And so here we all are sitting, the four authors and the team here, trying to come up with this title. And next thing, Pam, who's one of the authors, who is the spiritualist but also has very deep connection, and she gets feelings and messages all the time, and she goes, "Ooh, I think your father's in the room." And I went, "I think you might be right." And so we're hammering out what to do with this, and next thing I go, "Bringing death to life. Bringing death to life." And I could hear my father's voice as clear as I'm standing here looking at you. And he said, "Call it Bringing Death to Life." So I write it down, and the CEO looks over and she goes, what is that you just wrote? And I said, "My dad is talking to me." And she's like, "Okay." And I'm like, "He says this." And she went, "I love it. I absolutely love it." And so we pass it around, and everybody agrees we love it. So we do our deal, sign our contract, and which is very exciting, signing a book deal. And I get into my car to drive back to Athlone, and I put the phone on speaker, and I call home to America to my mother. Now, it's early. It's only 9 o'clock, and that's early. She's getting up for breakfast. And I'm like, Mom, guess what? We just signed the contract. You're not going to believe what happened. Dad was there. And she was like, whoa, what happened? She goes, I was dreaming about your father when I woke up. And I went, really? And she said, yeah. She goes, do you remember years ago when you made an album for us and you took all the old pictures that were falling apart from our wedding album? And I said, yeah. And she goes, do you remember an old picture of your dad drinking a Coke, or the bear drinking your dad's Coke? And I went, yes. And she goes, it was so strange. The dream was so strong, I actually woke up out of it and went down and got that picture out. And I'm like, well, Dad obviously wanted you to be part of this process. And then I told her what happens. And it was just so, it was happening in present time, congruently. And everybody was involved. And he just wanted her to be there. And he wanted her to be part of it. And what validation for me to go, guess what? The bear cup and all this. And she's like, how interesting. And so, when we're open and aware, we can get all sorts of signs. And there's a chapter in this book that's all about signs. And, we love that. And especially in Ireland, we love a sign. And it's a great country to have written a book about death, because the Irish are pretty awesome, as you know yourself, about celebrating death. Now, they do this, a mass every year for somebody after they've passed, and people will carry a little mass card in their wallets and all. And there's, it goes year after year, and they pay homage to the individual. But when it's time of the actual death, they wake people still. And so it becomes a 3-day hoolie. And so family and friends get together. So my village where I live, which Michael has visited, the village of Brideswell, consists of a funeral parlor and 2 pubs because they go hand in hand. And what happens in the Irish tradition is, once everybody's come through, usually they'll wake the person in the house and everybody comes in. And it's as casual, folks, as you'd be leaning up against the coffin, having a cup of tea, eating a sandwich, looking in, patting mommy on the head, chatting away. And to some people, they might go, oh, that's so gross, or that's very disrespectful. It's because it's so natural. And I love that about the Irish. I absolutely love it. And I hope that tradition never fades away, because it normalizes something that is a normal part of this process. And so you've got kids running around and their dead grandmother sitting there in the coffin. And I remember the first time I ever went in and, saw this whole kind of carry on. I'd seen dead bodies. I'm a doctor. I've dissected bodies, But going into this kind of process where there's the party atmosphere going around, that was new to me when I got there. And I'm like, this is amazing. And kids are flying around, and they go in and go, hi, Granny, and run out again. And they grab a sandwich and, chatting away. And the brothers and sisters are lining around there, and they're all come in. And there's a few tears are shed, and they're sharing stories and all this. That's amazing. That's an absolutely amazing way to celebrate somebody. So that happens in the house, and then they go to the funeral parlor. And they go to the funeral parlor, and then they get the removal to the church. Then they do the church, and then they go and they have a big feast, and everybody's welcome, And that's after they've done the graveside. And then they go out, they've done the graveside, and the neighbors will still dig the grave. I remember when our cat died, and my kids were little. And over the fence come my next door neighbor and the son with the shovels in hand. And they went and they dug the grave, and, the girls come out with a Justin Bieber poster. I'm sure I'm the only gravesite in Ireland that has a dead cat and a Justin Bieber poster in there, and because that's who they were into at the time. So here's my daughters, don't stop believing, and here's the next door neighbor shoveling the dirt into the grave and all. And it was a thing, and it was an amazing thing, and it was something that everybody was part of. And I don't think it's disrespectful in any way, shape, or form. It's celebrating something that's as natural as taking a breath. And that's why I said to you earlier, being part of that death process for me is just as much fun as being at a birth. I'm like watching the baby come in, and I'm going, wow, kiddo, you got a lot lot to look forward to. And I'm looking at this one going, well done. Do you know, absolutely well done. And I think something that we've done around death is that we have qualified it via its quantity. And I think that's a real shame. Because if anybody in here knows of or has personally lost a child or anyone who's of a young age that's close to you, try telling that person that that life wasn't as valuable because it didn't make it all the way to the end. And we have a really, really bad habit of going, well, they didn't make it to adulthood or they didn't do. We come here to do exactly what we come here to do. And it doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes. It doesn't matter if it's 50 years or if you make it to my mother is watching this at home at 90. You know, so it's demystifying death. That's what we're attempting to do here. And, you know, can it be a wonderful and reverent thing? And it's a really hard thing for people. And I have to, in my joy about talking about death, be very careful sometimes. I actually messed up last week. I hurt somebody's feelings absolutely 100% by accident. Do you know, it wasn't accident. It wasn't intentional on my part. And it was that they hadn't moved into a space where they were able to speak about it in the way that I was speaking about it. And so, you know what? You live and you learn. And with that individual, all I could do was say, I'm so sorry because my intention was not to upset you or hurt you. And I do have to be very careful about that sometimes because death just isn't scary. And I know there are people who are grieving and know people, I've lost my father. I've lost lots of people in my life. And I miss the presence. Oh boy, you know, just what you wouldn't give. We were driving into Burbank last night and we were on speakerphone with my mother. And she was like, you wouldn't believe what happened last night. Like, can you tell that's a normal phrase in our household? And she said, I just wasn't tired. I don't know if it was that full moon. I don't know, but it was midnight and I couldn't go to sleep. And she said, so I was sitting there in the bed with my eyes were wide open, and suddenly I felt an indent on the bed. And she said, I know somebody's here. And so she said she reached over to my dad's side. And she said, if you're here, hold my hand. And she said her arms started moving up the bed, and all of a sudden her fingers curled into the same position as if you were holding someone's hand, and she just went straight to sleep. And she said it was the most wonderful thing. Now, does she miss my father? Sure, absolutely. She was his wing woman for 60-something years. But she wrote a chapter in this book because she was the only one kind of in our circle who'd actually lost a spouse. I couldn't speak of that. I've lost a couple through divorce, but not through death. And sometimes it's harder when they're still alive. But woo! So she was the only one who could really write with any kind of genuine feeling about this. And so what she was telling people at the age of 90, she's going, you know what? It's okay to have had that love of your life and to have been so close, but it's also okay to move on. So like my mom went out and bought a Jeep after my dad died. She's driving to Richmond, Virginia tomorrow, you know, and I'm like, Mom, I think is it supposed to snow or something? She's like, I'll be grand. It'll be fine. She's 90. She's been back and forth to Ireland. She's been out here to LA every year. Like she is having a ball because being Coach Hensley's wife had a certain set of parameters that she willingly adhered to during that marriage, and she loved every bit of it. But she's enjoying a different kind of life and a different kind of freedom. And her chapter was about letting people know it's okay. It's okay to move on. You can love differently. You can live differently. It doesn't dishonor the relationship that you had with that individual. It means it's okay because you're still here. It's okay. You don't have to feel guilty. You don't have to feel bad. You don't have to feel sad all the time. It's okay to have pockets of that, pockets of grief. But if you've pitched a tent there and you're roasting marshmallows and you've been there for years and years and years, it's time to move on, right? Eat that s'more. Get on out there. So I wanted to share something with you from the book. This is called Beyond the Veil, and it gives a little taste of what it's like here. So connecting to signs and messages from beyond. So this is from Patricia Scanlan, this part. Bringing death to life is about embracing the spiritual gifts that are ours for the taking on our earthly journey, one which is only a step on a path that we can never see in full from our proximity here on earth. It is only when we rise up from our bodies and embrace the light from which we come and to which we return that we can see the whole picture. Loss, deeply painful as it is only ever temporary. And if we could see from a distance what our guides and angels witness, we'd be reassured of this. However, the reality is that for as long as we are alive, we reside here on earth, and even those of us with the greatest faith in a life beyond death still succumb to the challenges and pitfalls of the events that happen to us, grief included. As we grapple with a sense of emptiness, of longing, or of sheer wonder, and perhaps even existential crisis at what has become of a loved one who's passed over, we can lose sight of meaningful connections to our loved ones that can still be made. When we heighten our awareness, and deliberately set about connecting into the signs and messages that are delivered from the beyond by those who remain connected to us, not alone can it help relieve the sense of grief we feel, it can also give larger meaning to our own lives, as well as helping us to feel less alone and in the presence of a divine plan that has our well-being at heart. This has certainly been my experience with my mother and father, and even my cats, the latter whose loss I felt acutely, as any animal lover will understand. And I'd like to share with you how awakening to signs and messages has been a soothing balm for me many times and can be for you also. One such event was during the writing of this book, when I stayed with Pam for a few days at her lovely home in Horwich in England. The trip was completely unplanned. I was scheduled to go to a party for my publisher's 30th anniversary, and I'd mentioned to Pam that I was dreading the palaver that goes with traipsing through Heathrow and getting the train to London. It was less than a month since I had major surgery, and I felt very flat and tired. Pam kindly offered to fly to Dublin and fly back to London with me. I wouldn't hear of it, but out of the blue, I heard myself say, "Why don't I fly to Manchester, stay the night, and we'll make an event of it?" And so it was decided. And there we'd head on to London together, stay over, visit Kensington Palace to see other various exhibitions, and return to Manchester. Pam suggested I stay so that we could work on the book together, and it couldn't have happened more fortuitously. I flew to Manchester on the Saturday, a lovely, flat, calm day. Even the sea from above was as tranquil and glass-like as the calm before a storm sets in. On the Monday when I was originally due to fly, Hurricane Ophelia hit Ireland, and 90 flights out of Dublin had been canceled. While storm-force winds battered Ireland, Pam and I glided serenely on a fast train to London, where the temperature was unseasonably balmy. After our delightful, unexpected sojourn, we came back to Horwich the following evening and made our writing plans. I was treated like a queen, not allowed to lift a finger, and on the Thursday morning, after a mug of strong tea and a bacon buddy in bed, I opened my computer and wrote the first line of my introduction. I first became intimate with death when my beloved mother passed in 2007. Later, as we worked together in Pam's front room, I heard the words, "Pick a card," as if a voice had spoken to me. Pam has several decks of cards, including Angel, Mary, Magdalene, and Miracle cards, with inspiring messages and profound words of wisdom. I shuffled the 50 miracle cards, and I chose one, affirming a belief that underlies the first line I'd written earlier, intimacy. I couldn't believe it. What were the odds of having written the line about becoming intimate with death and then choosing that particular card? It affirmed my belief that we have to become intimate with death so that we can live side by side with us and be integrated into our lives with love, compassion, and acceptance. Pam picked a card from the Magdalene pack, and our jaws dropped. What card out of 45 had she chosen? Intimacy. Out of 140 cards, including the Angel series, which gave us celebration, our message was to share the intimacy of death with you, our precious readers, as we are all on this amazing journey together. It affirmed for us that we were doing the right thing in writing our book and giving us the courage to share personal and private details with you in an effort to spread the word that death is not the end. We knew without a shadow of a doubt, as we sat working in beautiful harmony on that dreary, wet day, that we were very much being guided by our loved ones who've passed. We could almost feel their excitement that the knowledge was being shared and that the veil that hangs between us was thinning. I felt that I should draw a card for you, dear readers, and the one that came was personal power. Reclaim your power to connect with loved ones who've gone on before us. We can all do it. Stay open. Believe the connection is there. Don't try too hard. Let the signs come easily and gently, and your lives will be enriched, your sadness and grief gently assuaged. There is only a thought away. When my mother died, Aidan assured me that she was very close and that I would receive signs from her. I hoped against hope that what he said was true and that it would happen, but I wondered if I would imagine things happen because I so badly wanted to know that she was still around. We held her funeral on a sunny, breezy day, and I looked at the prisms of light shining into the church through the stained glass window. As the priest said the lovely prayer of commendation, "May the angels lead you into paradise. May the martyrs come to welcome you and take you into the holy city, the new and eternal Jerusalem. May choirs of angels come and lead you to the bosom of Abraham. And where Lazarus is poor, no longer may you find eternal rest." A beam of multicolored light suddenly shone along the length of her coffin. A sense of great peace descended on the family, and for a moment we were comforted knowing that she was with us. 2 weeks later, on the morning we were to bring her ashes for burial in her home place at Rossler Harbor, I was awakened by 3 sharp knocks on the bedroom window. I knew it was her. I was sure I could hear her voice saying, "Get up, there's things to be done. Soon it'll be over." It was a long day driving to Wexford, worrying about my dad and how he would hold up, worrying about my siblings and how they were coping, having to meet and greet the family and friends who waited for us at the graveyard. It was like having a second funeral, exhausting and grief-filled. I stayed with my dad for a couple of weeks following my mother's death, and when I finally went home, I lay in bed that night, absolutely shattered, bereft, and wondering how my dad was getting on alone. I began to cry, and a certain scent enveloped me. Lily of the Valley, Nivea cream, Max Factor face powder, all that was familiar when my mother used to hug and kiss me. She was with me again, bringing her unique motherly comfort just as she used to when she was alive. It was a balm to my weary soul. The most direct sign she ever gave me was when I had to make a decision on which of 2 publishers I should sign a contract with. I was driving up to visit my dad, as I did every single day, and as I stared at a red light, I was mulling over the choices. I had to decide sooner rather than later. Suddenly, a little white van shot up alongside me in the inside lane. In big red font against the white background were the letters S&S. That's Simon & Schuster. I was astonished and started to laugh. My mother was making it clear in no uncertain terms whom she wanted me to sign with. Over the years since her death, there have been numerous times when I know my mother has given a sign to guide me in my life choices, and my sister has shared similar experiences, where clarifying synchronicities happen just when they are most needed. Watch for signs. Ask for them in the simplest way you'll be given. When my father passed almost 10 years after my mother, I was in no doubt that I would receive signs from him. We often discussed the ones my mother used to send. He loved hearing about them and had often had them from her himself, once he opened up to it. One of the best we ever had came during her first Christmas without her. We were at my sister's house for dinner, trying hard to put on the best front that we could, but still devastated by her loss. My mother had always made her own custard for the Christmas pudding and wouldn't have any truck with any ready to pour from a packet pudding. You know how that goes. They're very proud of their pudding. My sister and I would fib and say we made our own, covertly pouring bird's pudding into the jug when it was our turn to host the Christmas dinner. When it was time to serve the pud, my dad said with a twinkle in his eye, "Is that homemade custard?" "Of course it is," my sister assured him without batting an eyelid. At the next moment, the Christmas tree shook. A bauble bounced down the branches and hopped across the floor with a great clatter. We looked at each other wordlessly, then burst out laughing. She was with us, and we knew exactly how she felt about the ready-made custard. So I knew that after he died, my dad's signs would come, and that knowing him, that they would be fairly spectacular. One of the first he gave us occurred when my brother found a reference in some papers he was going through to my grandfather's death. My dad's father was a lighthouse keeper and had been on the Tuska Rock Lighthouse during the Second World War. A mine had drifted up against the rocks and exploded, mortally wounding my grandfather. He survived long enough to be taken ashore to hospital, but died the following day on the 3rd of December, the same date as my dad's death. We were amazed, but not really surprised that Dad would choose to go on the same date as his own father. Dad's signs always involve the color green, and they can be impressive. My first colorful post-death encounter happened when I was in Wicklow, in my mobile home, a few months after he passed. I was fast asleep, and a sharp knock on the bedroom window woke me up. I looked outside. It was a beautiful, clear night, and the star-studded sky was magical. I wrapped a blanket around myself and went out to the veranda. There's a 32-acre field in front of my plot and a beautiful view over the hills, which are patchworked in vibrant greens, rich gold, and loamy, earthy browns. I was alone. The knock I described had a clear, sharp sound, different from someone just tapping at the window, And strange as it may sound, my first thought upon hearing it was that somebody had just passed. Then I saw it. A light was flashing against a small satellite dish nestled in the yellow gorse. Who, I thought, is out in the field at 3 a.m. with a torch? Flashlight. Yet I could see no one. The flashing continued. Then a green light began to flicker around the edge of the satellite dish. And I watched in fascination, wondering what was unfolding. Then it hit me. I recalled how often I'd heard Dad tell me about his Morse code exams when he was studying for his tickets. Morse was used between the ships during the war when silence was a matter of life and death. Excuse me. Because German U-boats were stalking them. I stayed watching the flashing light for another while and felt deeply in my bones that Dad was signaling me. That old closeness returned, and it was very comforting. Excuse me. Lord, I might expire right here in front of all of y'all. Wouldn't that be funny? That'd be a great way to go viral, wouldn't it? I got your back, Reverend. Exactly. So that's a story from Trisha's excerpt in here, and then there's lovely stories from Aidan, from Pamela as well. And somebody's choking me. And so it's just a beautiful way, and that's an example. Trisha was just here with us last week. She had to go back home. It was her birthday, and she has a twin, and she wanted to be there to celebrate with him. But as my friend Peter and Angelica can attest to, everywhere we went, there were green lights. Everywhere we went. And she lives by that, and it's really interesting, and it gives her great peace and comfort. Now, you might be sitting there going, don't know, don't know. If it gives that person peace, what difference does it make to you, right? And if I stand up here and tell you that the relative appeared at the end of my bed, and you're like, yeah, I can't really buy that one or whatever, I don't care if you believe me or not. It happened. And so what you need to do in your own lives is don't second guess when you ask for something. And when you are looking for that sign, that message, ask. Don't just sit back and wait. Remember, God gave us elbows, right? Elbow grease. Spirituality requires some discipline and work. It's not just sitting back and going, the universe is going to provide. It's going to do everything I need. I don't know about y'all, but I still have to work every day, right? The universe is providing all the time. It provided me with that opportunity to have a job to go and make some money, right? And so elbow grease is required with that connection to the divine as well. And when you're talking about looking for signs or feeling somebody present, all you have to do is get yourself into a space and leave yourself open to it. But you have to ask and ye shall receive. It wasn't just, hey, y'all shall receive. Ask and ye shall receive. That's where the discipline is. And it's absolutely okay. And I hear from people a lot, if anybody in here is grieving a loss or has lost anyone recently, probably as someone who can speak to people who have passed, one of the things I hear most often is, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and I'm asking every day, and I'm not hearing anything. Let me explain something to you. Being somebody who went through the death process, when I got hit 75 miles an hour, broke my neck, died, went to the other side, that's a whole different book. What I realized was, oh gosh, this is exactly not what I was taught to believe in Sunday school. Wow. Because I don't know how some of you were raised, but I was raised believing that final destination, heaven, was that final resting place, that final destination. It doesn't work like that, folks. There are multiple realities. There are multiple ways to experience oneself. Your identity, your omnipotence, your divinity, everything that you are, that eternal, beautiful, fabulous being that you are. You really think this is it? That would stink. Do you know? Imagine that. Like, seriously? And so in passing into that space, I got to go, oh gosh, there's a lot that actually goes on here. And so people who don't necessarily hear immediately from a loved one, what you have to remember is there's something that I've called a debriefing period. And it's the debriefing period is when you get into that space and you're going through everything that you experience. So for me, I was 21, And so I had 21 years to work through. And what was fascinating was I was working through it like I was in a 360 cinema screen. It was happening all around me. So I was 3 over here at the same time I was 18 over here, at the same time I was 11 here, at the same time I was 20 here. And I was able to digest all of it. It was incredible, incredible. And we've made it this thing that, harps and clouds are like, really? Do you know?
Or the tunnels.
The tunnel, yeah. Yeah, walk into the light, Carol Ann. Do you know? My tunnel was really fast. So I land in this space, I go to this space. And so what was really amazing about that was realizing that there's a lot going on. And so if you don't hear from somebody that you've lost immediately, please bear in mind that based on whatever their life experiences were and what they need to integrate, it's not about you, it's about them. Be patient, still continue to ask, but don't ask from a space of desperation. Ask from a space of wonder and excitement and belief, and surround them in your thoughts and your prayers with what's going to be there for their highest good. Because when they get through that space, rest assured, you're going to see something, you're going to hear something, you're going to feel something. So just be patient with that. And remember, when you're bringing death to life, put a smile on your face. Yeah, it's sad when you lose somebody that you love, but if you think that they're gone for good, you better think again. Because death is but a doorway. And having been through that experience and lived the tale to come back and tell it, it's like walking from this room to that one. It's as simple as that. So I thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And how much fun was that? Yeah. Who knew death could be so fun, right? Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give Dr. Mary Helen. We worked hard for that title. We should use it.
What?
Doctor.
Yeah.
So we like to, if you've come prepared with an offering, that would be great. We always use help with the light bill. There are baskets in the back, and you can leave your gift there. We're going to close with what we call a spiritual mind treatment. So I'm going to invite Suzanne up. So there's still lots of books on the other side. Well, through the doorway. Oh, maybe. In this reality, there are many books. And Mary Helen is here to sign those for you. And so I know I'm going to get one. And join us, and we can share a little bit before you mosey home. So please pray about this.
So, I know we all go home today expanded in awareness of being, of one energy, eternal life in a really nice, expanded way, new way of knowing about that, hearing about that. And I know that it resonates inside all of us in some way. And we find an understanding of what bringing death to life is, and that we all feel really good about it tonight. And we go home easily and safely, and we have a good night's rest, and we wake in the morning ready to live our best life, all enlightened and feeling good. And I release my word of the law, knowing it's done, and together we say, and so it is.